ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। Kantra Śrimad Bhāgavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 23, Text 2. विश्रम्भेणात्मशौचेन गौरवेण दमेन च शुश्रूषया सौहृदेन वाचा मधुरया च भो विश्रम्भेणात्मशौचेन गौरवेण दमेन च शुश्रूषया सौहृदेन वाचा मधुरया च भो विश्रम्भेणात्मशौचेन गौरवेण दमेन च शुश्रूषया सौहृदेन वाचा मधुरया च भो Vaishnavis. Vishrambhen, with intimacy. Atma Shauchena, with purity of mind and body. Gauravena, with great respect. Damena, with control of the senses. Cha, and Shushrushaya, with service. Sahurudena, with love. Vacha, with words. Madhuraya, sweet. Cha, and Bho, O Vidura. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. O Vidura, Devavati served her husband with intimacy and great respect, with control of the senses, with love and with sweet words. Here two words are very significant. Devahuti served her husband in two ways, Vishrambhena and Gauravena. These are two important processes in serving the husband or the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Vishrambena means with intimacy, and Gauravena means with great reverence. The husband is a very intimate friend, therefore the wife must render service just like an intimate friend, and at the same time, she must understand that the husband is superior in position and thus she must offer him all respect. A man's psychology and women's psychology are different. As constituted by bodily frame, a man always wants to be superior to his wife, and a woman, as bodily constituted, is naturally inferior to her husband. Thus, the natural instinct is that the husband wants to post himself as superior to the wife, and this must be observed. Even if there is something wrong on the part of the husband, the wife must tolerate it, and thus there will be no misunderstanding between husband and wife. Vishrambhena means with intimacy, but it must not be familiarity that breeds contempt. According to the Vedic civilization, a wife cannot call her husband by name. In the present civilization, the wife calls her husband by name, but in Hindu civilization, she does not. Thus, the inferiority and superiority complexes are recognized, the main nature. A wife has to learn to control herself, even if there is a misunderstanding. Sahurudena vacha madhuraya means always desiring good for the husband and speaking to him with sweet words. A person becomes agitated by so many material contacts in the outside world. Therefore, in his home life, he must be treated by his wife with sweet words. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjalishalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Caitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So today morning we are discussing from the Śrimad Bhāgavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 23. So this is the section of Devahuti being enlightened by Kardam Muni. So if we consider the Śrimad Bhāgavatam, I'll speak about this verse in the broader context of the Śrimad Bhāgavatam, and I'll use this as a blackboard to depict some things. So, does anyone know how many cantos are there in the Bhāgavatam? 14, okay. Okay, 12 cantos, yeah. Does anyone know how many chapters? Yeah, I believe 335 chapters. Now, out of them, 90 are in the 10th canto. And this is considered to be the heart of the Śrimad Bhāgavatam. Now, the Śrimad Bhāgavatam, its core conversation starts from the 2nd canto and goes till approximately 11.4. This is the discussion between Shukadeva Goswami and Parikshit Maharaj. So Parikshit Maharaj is about to die, and last 7 days he decides to sit and focus on transcendence. And Shukadeva Goswami helps him in that final journey by speaking about Krishna. So now there are hundreds of stories, there are many pastimes given in the broad body of Vedic scriptures. And Shukadeva Goswami acts as a spiritual historian. And Parikshit Maharaj, he has one purpose, to focus on remembrance. So Parikshit Maharaj is told those stories, those points, not just stories, there's philosophy also, but there is philosophy or points, those which are most relevant for Parikshit Maharaj. That is what he is told. Now, there are many stories in the Bhagavatam itself, and it is a fascinating exercise to see how different stories contribute to the focus on transcendence. So within the Bhagavatam's journey, in one sense, Srila Prabhupada writes in one of his books, On the Way to Krishna, say, if we are here, and this is the world around us, and then far above in the spiritual world, there is Krishna here. So it is not that suddenly one day people start thinking about Krishna. It's possible, but generally, see, what happens is we look at the world and then we think, what is the source? And when by looking at the world, then we start thinking of something beyond the world. So the Bhagavatam, that means, so Prabhupada writes in the book On the Way to Krishna, that all knowledge comes from Krishna, but knowledge doesn't usually begin with Krishna. Knowledge begins with the world around us. And then gradually, while observing the world around us, we start thinking, is there something beyond this world? Is there some source? So the Bhagavatam, essentially the Bhagavatam contains two things. It contains philosophy and it contains pastimes. And both of these are meant to foster remembrance of Krishna. That is the common purpose of everything in the Bhagavatam. So now, in the journey of the Bhagavatam, if we say from Canto 2 to Canto 12, or specifically 11th Canto, where 12th Canto actually, sorry, it's not, this one I said is not 11.4, it's 12.4. So, till 10 to, what is happening is, initially the Bhagavatam focuses on the world, and it starts focusing on the avatars in the world. And then it eventually focuses on the Ete Chamsha Kalapumsa, the Avatari Krishna, in the 10th canto. So the idea is, we see God in the world. After we see God in the world, we see God in the world means we see God in the way the world functions. Then we look at how God descends in this world. And there are many different descents, and then among them, the descent of the highest manifestation of divinity. That is Krishna, where he replicates the spiritual world over here. That is described. So there is a gradual ascension in the form of remembrance. Various forms of remembrance. So when we talk about remembering the Lord in the world, there are three broad ways the Bhagavatam talks about this. One is the Virat Rupa. This is described in various places, but especially it comes in the 2nd canto. There's a chapter which Prabhupada titles as the first step in God realization. That means we look at the world, and while we are looking at the world, we see the hugeness of the world. And we contemplate this whole universe is actually the body of God. And so the mountains are like the bones, the rivers are like the water in his navel, and the trees are like the hair of his body, universal body. Like that, we look at the world and we think of God. So that is Virata Rupa. Then there is the Brahmanda. That the universe, what we might call as cosmography or more per se cosmology, that is described in the 5th canto. And there also, now Parikshit Maharaj already knows some level of cosmology. But what Shukdev Goswami is showing is how he can see Krishna within his knowledge of cosmology. And in between these two is the analysis of Sankhya. And that comes in the 3rd canto. So this section that we are discussing is primarily about, Sankhya is already something which is known to Parikshit Maharaj. See, in general, growth of knowledge. How does it happen? There is something which is familiar to us. Sorry. Okay. Something which is familiar, and then there is something which is unfamiliar. So normally growth of knowledge happens this way, that we move towards, from the familiar towards the unfamiliar. If when education is happening, if you are giving only the familiar, then that leads to boredom, that leads to no growth at all. Hey, I already know all this. What's the point of talking about all these things? So if there's only the familiar, that leads to boredom. But if there is only the unfamiliar, that means if you come to a class and all the points you're hearing are the same old points, then you start feeling bored with the class. But if you come to a class and everything that we hear is completely new, we can't place it. Okay, what is this going on? Suppose you come for a Bhāgavatam class and say, I start speaking on, say, the philosophy of Socrates. And then I go to, and I don't connect it at all with Bhāgavatam. Then say, what is going on over here? So if there's complete unfamiliarity, then there is disconnection. Why should I be interested in it? What is it connected with? There's disconnection. So knowledge generally grows from the familiar to the unfamiliar. So whenever something is to be spoken, it's what is familiar to the audience that has to be first understood. And what is on that foundation of what is familiar, we build further up. And we teach what is unfamiliar. And this is where one of the biggest challenges in understanding the Bhagavatam comes. Because if we consider the timeline, the Bhagavatam at one level is giving timeless wisdom. The principle of remembering Krishna is timeless. But if we consider this to be like the timeline, then right now we are here in 2023. The Bhagavatam, according to the tradition, was spoken in 3000 BC. Now, when the Bhagavatam was spoken over here, so what is going to happen is that when it was spoken here, at that time, there was certain knowledge that was familiar. That was familiar at that time. And now, when we are here, there is certain knowledge that is familiar to us. And these two can be very different. So we can talk about the difference, firstly, straightforward in terms of the language itself. The Bhagavatam is spoken in a language that was familiar to people at that time. That is, Parikshit Maharaj knew the language, the sages knew that language, that was Sanskrit. Now today, the language is different. Today we are speaking in English. In different parts of the world we speak in different languages. But language is just one of the things. So, when knowledge grows from the familiar to the unfamiliar, then what happens is that, say for example, let's talk about the particular section that we are discussing now. There is Sankhya over here, and there is cosmology over here. Now this is not the timeline, this is the Bhagavatam's flow. So this is the 5th canto, cosmology. And this is the 3rd canto, Sankhya, which we are, sorry, not 3rd canto, this is, we are 3rd canto only, correct, sorry. So, this is Sankhya. Now when we are speaking this, what has happened is, Parikshit Maharaj already knows certain things. So for example, Parikshit Maharaj has certain cosmological knowledge. And what Shukdev Goswami is showing is how within this cosmological knowledge you can see Krishna. That he had knowledge of these are the planet, this is this, this is this, this is this, and how can you see Krishna within that? And similarly, Sankhya. Parikshit Maharaj also knew Sankhya. Sankhya, you could say broadly, was something like, now, it's a very rough generalization, something like Vedic physics. The Sankhya and maybe sometimes Vaisheshika is also considered to be like physics, but it depends on how you look at it. But basically, it's analysis of material elements. So there was already a certain knowledge that was familiar, and on the foundation of the familiar, now knowledge about Krishna is not exactly unfamiliar for Parikshit Maharaj, but the connection of Sankhya with Bhakti or Sankhya with Krishna is what is being described. Now in the Mahabharata, it is described that at that time there are 3 kinds of Sankhya. So for simplicity purposes, we will use them by numbers. There was 24 Sankhya, there is 25 Sankhya, and there is 26 Sankhya. This is not like Windows 10, Windows 11, Windows 12 like that. But any idea what this refers to? Yeah. No, that's not, I'm not asking for a listing of 24. What does 24, 25, 26 refer to? Yes, exactly. So this is materialistic Sankhya. That means you analyze the material world and the conclusion is that there is nothing beyond matter. So we break down the material world into its components and thereby we understand that this world is ultimately a place of illusion. Say, if we get some very attractive object, we say there is some halwa. As soon as we see it, we may desire to eat it. But if you take some of the components of halwa, if there is this item and that item and that item, they're all put in heaps in the kitchen. We will not feel that same irresistible desire for it. Why? Because those individual components are attractive, but when they're put into combination, they become attractive. So the idea is, the material world contains many attractive objects. But when we break them down into components, then we understand, this is not that attractive. If we are watching TV, now if you are watching TV, we might see a movie, we might see sports, and we might be attracted to it. But if we were watching TV and we understood that actually these are just 3 color pixels coming over there, and we are looking and we also saw this pixel coming, this color coming, we would not be attracted to that. So the idea is there is a deconstruction of matter into its components so that we become detached. So Sankhya, even 24 Sankhya is ultimately meant for detaching oneself from the world. But their idea is there is nothing beyond matter. So it's something like, maybe something Buddhist, voidist or something like that. That okay, you just become detached from matter and then you'll no longer be entangled. Now 25 Sankhya is monistic. Monistic means that there is beyond matter there is spirit, but there is only one spirit. So the spirit within me and spirit within you and the spirit of the universe, they're all one. So this could be Brahmavad or this could be Mayavad. But this is impersonalistic. That's 25 Sankhya. And then 26 Sankhya is Bhagavad Sankhya, where there are 2 truths beyond matter. There is the soul and there is the Supreme Lord. There is Jiva and there is Ishvara, there is Bhagavan. And this is the version of Sankhya that the Bhagavatam is teaching. Now if today we go into academia and if we decide to study Indian philosophy and if we decide to study Sankhya, most people study the 24, most books talk about the 24 Sankhya or at most the 25 Sankhya. The classic book of Sankhya is Ishwar Krishna's Sankhya Karika, and that does not mention anything about the 26 Sankhya. The Sankhya in which Bhagavan is involved. So the point I'm making is that while Sankhya itself was familiar, but the idea of connecting Bhagavan with Sankhya, that is the Bhagavatam's distinctive contribution. So knowledge goes from the familiar to the unfamiliar. It goes from the familiar to the unfamiliar. And in this particular section, what Parikshit Maharaj is being provided with is, he already has some knowledge of Sankhya. And Shukdev Goswami is going to show him how he can see Krishna within Sankhya. How he can see, say suppose somebody has done a PhD in physics and now they become a devotee. Now they can come and hear about they can come out and hear about Krishna, they can hear about pastimes of Krishna, and naturally they will be attracted. But if somebody else also is a PhD in physics, maybe a more experienced physicist, and that person happens to be a devotee also, and then they can say, okay, in this physics theory, this is quantum mechanics, and quantum mechanics there's room for consciousness, maybe there's a room for an ultimate consciousness, and that would be much more interesting for that person, because that person already has some knowledge. So basically, Krishna consciousness, there can be two ways broadly in which you can be Krishna conscious. One is bring Krishna into our consciousness. And that's the standard way which we practice. That means that we hear about Krishna, and by that Krishna comes into our consciousness. But the other way is bring what is in our consciousness in contact with Krishna. That means, say suppose somebody already knows music. When Srila Prabhupada came to America, Prabhupada here in Tompkins Square Part and other places, when he would do kirtan, people would have all kinds of instruments. And they would come there and Prabhupada would welcome them and join in the kirtans. So, what was in their consciousness was their particular musical instrument. And what Prabhupada was doing is, okay, bring that in contact with Krishna. So both ways, that means this Krishna is out there, my consciousness is here, I bring Krishna into my consciousness, that is Krishna consciousness. But there is something already in my consciousness. Now does that all have to be driven out of my consciousness? Well, some of it has to be. If it's lust or greed or angry or jealousy or something like that, anger or jealousy, well, much of it has to be removed. But that doesn't mean everything that has been there, all that is there from the past in our consciousness has to be removed. No, some of it can be connected with Krishna. So that way, what happens is that what is already there, we can build on it. There are devotees in different parts of the world who are now trying to do outreach according to time, place, circumstance. So there's one devotee, I met him recently, he says that he's writing a book on a spiritual perspective or a Vedic perspective or a Bhagavad Gita perspective on African sayings. So that is for outreach in Africa, people already know those sayings. And how can those sayings be understood from a spiritual perspective, from a Bhagavad Gita perspective? So those sayings are already familiar, you connect that with the unfamiliar. What is unfamiliar for them is Krishna consciousness. So Sankhya involves this particular thing. That which was already familiar, the analysis of the material world in 24 elements, now he says there can be Bhagavan in this element also. And while telling this, now this is the important part of the Bhagavatam. So before telling this, if we consider third canto, there are many things happening in third canto. But more or less from chapter 25 onwards till the end, there is this description of Sankhya. Now it's approximately where exactly it starts. There is the discussion between Kapila and Devahuti and before that. Now before that, you could say approximately chapters 20 to 25, there is the backstory. The backstory means that, okay, when Parikshit Maharaj is being told about this Bhagavad Sankhya, how he can see Krishna within nature. So is it that Parikshit Maharaj is, Parikshit Maharaj's teacher Shukdev Goswami is himself coming up with all this and speaking this? No, he's saying that what I'm speaking right now has been spoken before. And when was this spoken? This was spoken a long time ago. It was spoken by the Lord himself, by Kapila Dev to Devahuti. And when it is spoken by Kapila Dev to Devahuti, how that came about, that Parikshit Maharaj is being told. So what we are going through right now is the backstory. Now, within the backstory itself, there are also elements which can help us remember Krishna. So the whole purpose of the Bhagavatam is to help us become Krishna conscious. Just like the purpose of the Bhagavatam for Parikshit Maharaj was to enhance his Krishna consciousness. Similarly, everything in the Bhagavatam is meant for enhancing our Krishna consciousness. Now, in this backstory, before Kapila Dev is born, this divine personality, who is not just divine personality in the sense that he has divine attributes, but his divinity descended to this world. That person, when he comes to this world, how does he come about? How do his parents meet each other? How do they go about in their relationship? That is being described over here. And in the relationship, so we have Devahuti and we have Kardam Muni. Now, in their relationship, there are two aspects that are described. Vishrambhena and Gauravena. So, there is intimacy and there's reverence. So here, these two, intimacy is more about it's a sense of closeness. It's a sense of a person is very, very dear to me, person is very close to me. And Gauravena is a little bit more of, oh, this person is such a great person. So in one sense, this very much echoes a later description about the Krishna soul relationship. In that, there is Madhurya, and then there is, anyone remembers? Aishwarya. So Madhurya, you can say, is sweetness. And Aishwarya is greatness. So now both of these are required. If you want to practice bhakti, knowing the greatness of God, that brings submission. That brings humility. Knowing the greatness of sweetness of God brings affection. You know, Krishna is the Supreme Lord, but he is running away from his mother in fear. He gets tied by her. How sweet this is. So, that considering the sweetness of Krishna, that although he's great, he does not always brag about his greatness. He wants to submit himself. He wants to be in having a close relationship with his devotees. So when there is this combination of affection and submission, that is strong devotion. The devotion, if it is only based on submission, then it will be dry. Oh, God is great and I am small and I have to simply obey him. It becomes solely like a master-slave kind of relationship. On the other hand, if it's only based on affection, then it will become sentimental. Sentimental means today I like you, tomorrow I don't like you. So then there is a combination of appreciation of God's greatness and appreciation of God's sweetness, then there is strong or steady devotion. So now this particular dynamic is in general within the Bhagavatam's journey, it begins more and more with Aishwarya. For example, if we talk about when Varaha Dev appears, the devatas are offering prayers. So it's like this, that if we consider the evolution of divinity within the Bhagavatam, the evolution of not divinity so much as revelation of divinity. How divinity is revealed in the Bhagavatam. So initially there is like a lot of Madhurya is less. Yes, there is and Aishwarya is very high. So there is some Madhurya also. It is described that when Vamanadev Varahadev looks at the Brahmana, there's an affection-filled glance that he is casting at them. But overall, this Hiranyakshi is a terrible demon, and Varahadev has come to save us. So initially the Aishwarya is more, the Madhurya is relatively less. So this is, for example, for the avatar that are described initially, Varaha, and other avatars, even Parshuram, it comes later. But as we move towards Krishna, what happens is, the Madhurya becomes much more, and the Aishwarya becomes much lesser. So Mother Yashoda, if she is involved in the thinking of Krishna, the Aishwarya, then she cannot even think of tying Krishna. How can I tie God? That would be offensive. But she does it because for her, it's my child. And if my child is being undisciplined, I have to discipline him. So that's Aishwarya has gone way down and Madhurya has become very strong. So that is the way the Bhāgavatam evolves in its own revelation of Krishna. So here, that same theme, see what is a theme in the soul-Krishna relationship, that is also being indicated over here in the wife-husband relationship. That there is Vishrambhena and Gauravena. So now, these kind of statements today, in today's world can cause some concern, if not some anger. You know, why is Prabhupada speaking like this? A woman has to be submissive to a man. Don't women have their own rights? And what if the man is abusive? So all these are natural questions that may come up. So when we come across Srila Prabhupada's statements, which are difficult for us to understand. So there are broadly 3 ways we could respond to them. Now, if you consider a pendulum, now one way is we absolutize them. This is this is what it is, and you accept it or you get out. If you can't accept this is true, then you are unfaithful, you are blasphemous, you can never become a devotee. In fact, you are going to go to hell because you are questioning Krishna's pure devotee. So, that is absolutizing such statements. Now, if somebody has, for example, been scarred by some bad experience with the male authority figures, maybe somebody had a negligent or abusive father, maybe somebody had any kind of abusive male-female relationship, then the idea of a male authority figure and the idea of submitting to a male authority figure can be very difficult for such a person to accept. And if you tell them that this is we absolutize it, it's going to be very difficult for them. Now, Prabhupada himself was very clear that he came to establish the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. He did not come to establish the International Society for Male Chauvinism. He did not come to establish the International Society for Patriarchy. Now, that is not his purpose. Now, so saying this, some people may go to the other extreme and they may relativize the statements. Yeah, if you can't accept it, forget it. Don't worry. This is all, people say, Prabhupada gives spiritual teachings and they are important. All other things that he spoke, that's all relative. If you want to accept it, you don't accept it. That's up to you. Now, if we start relativizing, if we absolutize, we will alienate a lot of people. A lot of people who might be otherwise interested in bhakti, they may get alienated. But if we start relativizing, then what may happen is, it can become very self-serving. So everything that I find difficult to accept, I start relativizing it, isn't it? So if I say that, okay, waking up in the morning, yeah, That's relative. Chanting Hare Krishna, that is also relative. And then what will remain if we start relativizing it? So once we start relativizing, where do we stop? So in between the two of these is what Srila Prabhupada himself taught us is contextualize. Now contextualize means, sometimes contextualize and relativize can seem the same, but the two are significantly different. Contextualize means that there is a specific context in which the statement is spoken, and we need to consider the specific context. But even when the statement is spoken in a specific context, there is underlying it a universal principle. And that universal principle needs to be understood. So when we relativize, yeah, this statement, I can't accept this, so I reject the statement. That's relativizing. But contextualizing is, okay, this statement was spoken at a particular time, in a particular context. And that context may or may not be the same today. But so that statement in its literal articulation may not apply. But there is an underlying principle that can and should be understood. So let's try to understand this contextualization approach. And without this, there are many ways in which we'll just not be able to understand what Prabhupada is saying. Because sometimes Prabhupada may say opposite statements. So we can take many examples of this. But let's take one example where we'll see which of these approaches can be applied. So for example, one disciple writes to Srila Prabhupada, and he says that now we have the letters that Srila Prabhupada wrote to his disciples. We don't have the letters that his disciples wrote to him. Because those were many of them were private. They were having their own concerns, their own challenges. They were describing that. So we have the replies. So to one disciple, Prabhupada replies that he's probably written some letters. He says that if you are troubled by sex desire, it is my standing instruction to all my disciples that they should get married and they should practice bhakti in the grahastha ashram. So one is a sex desire, get married. Now the other is, there's another devotee, Prabhupada writes to him and he says, you say you are troubled by sex desire? He says, everybody is troubled by sex desire. Even Brahmaji is troubled by sex desire. If anybody thinks that marriage is going to be the solution to sex desire, that person is in Maya. The only way sex desire can be dealt with is, you have to tolerate. So now, in fact, Prabhupada is saying, marriage is not meant to a license for fulfilling sex desire. He says, if you have sex desire, learn to tolerate it. Now, what is the principle over it? One is saying get married, other saying marriage is no solution. It's more specific. The contradiction is when you see that marriage is no solution. So, now I'm paraphrasing, but essentially Prabhupada has made this statement like this. So, how do we reconcile the two points? Is Prabhupada recommending marriage? Is Prabhupada forbidding marriage? No. The point is, Prabhupada's purpose is to encourage everyone towards Krishna consciousness. And the sexual energy is one of the strongest energies within the human beings, which can drag a person away from Krishna. So that it is vital that the sexual energy be managed properly. Now in different situations, how that sexual energy can be managed and regulated so that that person can move toward Krishna, that will vary. So if somebody is troubled by a particular level of sexual restraint, so they cannot be celibates, then okay, you can get married. But if somebody starts thinking marriage as a license for sense gratification, then that sexual energy will still keep distracting them from Krishna. So the common principle underlying both of these is, so at one level, this and this can seem contradictory. But the reconciliation is that regulation of sexual energy. Regulation of sexual energy so that there can be focus on Krishna. In the Bhagavatam also said that Bhoga Ishwara Pasaktanam Taya Paharita Chetasam. That Vyavasayatmika Buddhi Samadhauna Vidhiyate. That everyone has to learn to regulate. So, the another way of understanding this is that, say, if this is Krishna, or this is the ladder by which you want to go towards Krishna, or there is Krishna at the top. Now, we may have one boundary within which we live, or we may have another boundary within which we live. So, say, Brahmacharya ashram is one boundary, Grahastha ashram is another boundary. But the point is, there is some boundary that is required for everyone. And while living in that boundary, we try to raise our consciousness upwards. So, the principle, contextualizing is not relativizing. Contextualizing is, we look for the universal principle underlying those two opposing statements. And then we try to apply that principle in our life. So, now in this particular context, what is the universal principle? The universal principle is that there has to be, if a person is in the Grahastha ashram, there has to be harmony in the Grahastha ashram. Now, how exactly is that harmony going to come about? Now, traditionally, that harmony came by having, say, the wife and the husband in a somewhat hierarchical relationship. Now, although this is hierarchical, it's very clear that in the same verse it is saying that Gauravena is there, but also Vishrambhena is there. That this hierarchy, the way it is portrayed in today's world, is that much of the mainstream media and mainstream academia, they are very left-oriented. They are very left-wing. And so here this hierarchy is, there is submission plus affection. There is, both of them are there. So it is, the wife feels inspired by the husband, and they all want to come together and have a harmonious life together. And she is inspired. There is a submission that is accompanied by affection. But now, if it becomes solely like this, that the husband is on top, the husband is domineering, there is no affection, there is only the use of power, then that is not healthy. If there is only Gauravena and no Vishrambhena, then there will simply the exercise of power, and the other person will feel restricted, will feel suffocated, and there may be rebellion. So the point is that what is the purpose? So if it's entirely like this, where it's completely abuse of power, then the reaction may be, it may just not become like this eventually. People may claim it's like this. The wife should be superior, the husband should be inferior, or whatever. So we could have the wife and the husband. So either it could be completely vertical, it could be completely horizontal. Now exactly how things work in the world can vary from time, place, circumstance. Prabhupada's purpose is that husband and wife both should be Krishna conscious. Now the exact dynamic of how the relationship will work within each family, it is not the spiritual master's business to microcontrol a disciple's life. The principle is that, like, from a biological perspective, what Prabhupada senses that says that the husband is physically, the male body is physically stronger than the female body. So there is some level of hierarchy required. And it is not just because it is stronger, the male body is stronger. A woman may say, why am I stuck with a weaker body? No, it's not like that. The point is, husband and wife, they come together for a higher purpose. If that higher purpose is not clear, then everything becomes about, okay, this particular relationship and the dynamics in that relationship. But without a purpose, what is the higher purpose? The higher purpose is twofold. One is to have children, and the other is to raise your consciousness, to raise towards Krishna consciousness. We raise our children in Krishna consciousness, we raise ourselves in Krishna consciousness. Now, even if somebody doesn't want to talk about Krishna consciousness, somebody is, say, living a non-spiritual life, but even then, they want to come together, they want to raise a family, they want to raise their children, have a family, raise the children with some good values. All parents want their children to be successful. Now, to be successful, to be happy, to be virtuous, whatever be the particular conception of virtue that might be there. Now, for that purpose, it is the fact that women, especially when they have children, they are in a relatively vulnerable position. The child needs to be, newborn child needs to be protected, and the woman needs to be protected, especially in that period. Other times also, but especially during that period. And if there is no proper social arrangement for the protection of women, and specifically the protection of women when they are going to have children or when they have children, then the whole function of society of procreation and continuation, that itself will not be there. For 50 years in society, there has been a huge propaganda called the population bomb. Oh, population is exploding and the earth will be overgrown and there'll be nothing. There'll not be enough for humanity not be enough resources on the earth to survive. It has been there for a long time, but the last 50 years it's been huge. But now more and more sociologists are recognizing the danger for the world is not the population bomb, it is the depopulation bomb. It is, especially in the Western world, in the Caucasian population, what is happening is that the procreation rates are falling way below the normal rates required for the sustenance of humanity. And now in Japan, for example, now the government is actually paying families to have children. They will pay you for months and for years. And several countries in Europe are also considering that. America, if it had not been for two things, the immigrants who have come from various parts of the world and they are having children, and if it had not been the evangelical Christians who they follow that, reproduce and prosper, the Old Testament saying, biblical saying. Otherwise, if we consider the rest of the American population, already America's population would have been decreasing at alarming levels. And the result of that would be, even if it's the welfare state, there are lots of people who need to be taken care of, if not by the family, by the state. And there are very few working population to take care of states. So what is happening is that there are more and more people who, even parents who want to have children, women especially, they want to be mothers, but it's just socially it becomes very difficult for them. So that is just one aspect. I don't want to go into the specific sociological dimensions of the issue, but the point is that leave alone spirituality. If there is not familial harmony, and there is not an appropriate dynamic by which familial harmony can be maintained, then society will collapse. Or even materially, what to speak of spiritually. So Srila Prabhupada's purpose is not to impose a particular hierarchy within the family. Just like we talk about regulation of sexual energy, there is the regulation of the relationship of the family, within the family, so that both can cooperatively do the material function of raising children, and it's also spiritualizable function, and then the spiritual function of raising everyone's consciousness. So that is the essential principle. That is, everybody should be able to be Krishna conscious. And the specific dynamic which will work in each family, that is something which has to be negotiated, that has to be understood by proper discussion. Just like Narad Muni gave one instruction, I'll conclude with this point. Narad Muni gave one instruction to Dhruva. He says, just tolerate this anger, go back home, don't be so serious. Don't take this so seriously. And Dhruva says, the words you are speaking are true, but they find no place in my heart, because my heart is wounded. He says, I need a kingdom bigger than my father's. If you can help me, please, otherwise let me go. He's humble, but he's firm, he's candid. So here we see in the Bhagavatam itself, the guru-disciple relationship. Disciple is here, guru is here. This is not the mode of the relationship. The mode is more negotiation. Disciple is here. So this is more of instruction. The guru is here. This is more of negotiation. And it is not that because Dhruva did not follow the instruction, what was given to him first, the Dhruva is condemned. No, even through negotiation, till he can authentically follow. That Narad Muni appreciates his candor. Narad Muni gives him an instruction that he can follow. And he's spectacularly successful. He's able to have darshan of the Lord directly. So similarly, within whatever hierarchies that might be there in our particular relational dynamics, we need to be able to come to a platform where we can function in a way that is conducive for our Krishna consciousness. And that was the purpose of Srila Prabhupada, to encourage all of us, to guide all of us to raise our consciousness toward Krishna. So I'll summarize. I discussed 3 broad points. The first point was significance of this section of Bhagavatam. The whole Bhagavatam is meant to help Parikshit Maharaj remember Krishna, and that remembrance happens in 2 ways. One is through pastimes, and the other is through philosophy. Both of them are meant to enhance Krishna consciousness. So we discussed 2 broad ways of Krishna consciousness. One is we bring Krishna into our consciousness, and the other is we bring what is in our consciousness into Krishna. So in this particular case, Sankhya is what is familiar. So this was from Sankhya to Bhakti. That was the section which we were talking about. So from the familiar to the unfamiliar. Now Bhakti itself is not unfamiliar for Parikshit Maharaj, but how exactly the Bhakti can be connected with Sankhya, as he was knew about, that is what is described in this section. Now as a prelude to that section, what is the source of this knowledge of Sankhya connected with Bhakti? In that connection, the story of Devahuti and Kapila is told. And in that connection, what is happening is this particular pastime, and within that, the dynamic of the relationship between Devahuti and Kardamuni is being told. So we discussed here that when we are trying to see the specific pastimes, the approach could be, we could absolutize, we could relativize, but what we need to do is contextualize. So contextualize means we look at the underlying universal principle, and then we focus on how we can apply that principle. In that connection, I discussed 2 things. Prabhupada's statement about regulation of sexual energy, of sex desire, sexual energy. And then the second example we discussed, the relational dynamics within family. So we understand the underlying principle that there has to be family harmony for both material and spiritual well-being. And we find out the particular dynamics of the relationship within one particular family, and we move forward cooperatively in our journey toward Krishna. Are there any questions or comments? Maharaj, any comments, Maharaj? Yes, please. Okay, yeah.
Oh, well, so you were talking about how from the relationship from the wife to the husband, it's supposed to be submissive and affectionate. But what about vice versa? What would the relationship from the husband to the wife be? If that makes sense.
Yeah. So how is the relationship between from husband towards wife? Well, there primarily the responsibility is protection. So protection is also out of affection. Protection is also out of concern. Protection is also out of sense of responsibility. So protection is not just like it's not like a police protecting someone. It's more like an affectionate relationship. So affection is there both ways. So generally, the whole idea of the Bhagavatam is to talk about raising our consciousness towards Krishna. So from that perspective, that If you consider Krishna over here. So Krishna is here, Guru is here, the husband is here, the wife is here, and the children are here. So the idea is, this is a link. And this links us toward Krishna. The Guru is connected with Krishna, the husband follows, so the Guru follows Krishna, the husband follows the Guru, the wife follows the husband, and children follow the wife. Now that is the traditional hierarchy that is described. Now whether that exactly is how things will work in today's world, not necessarily. It might be the wife might become a devotee, the husband might not be a devotee. Then how exactly the family dynamics are to be there? The whole point is that there was a traditional system for a person to go towards Krishna. Now, and within that, the husband's relationship with the wife is more of protective. And now specifically, again, things may vary in terms of the particular dynamics of the situation. Okay. Thank you. Yes, Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Yeah.
Oh. I really enjoyed your class. I love the way that you used the board. I was able to see you speak in Dallas a month or two ago, so I'm glad to see you here as well. I mostly just have a comment. I really enjoyed the way you kind of drew the similarities between the way that even Krishna submits, right, to his mother when she ties him up, and how that's out of affection, that's out of the submission as a way to allow her to love him in the way that she needs to in that moment. I thought that was really beautiful.
Thank you. Happy to be of service. So thank you very much. Grantraj Śrimad Bhāgavatam ki, Śrīla Prabhupada ki, Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki, Sai Gaur Premanande.